have a tour.
Quack, 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 quack. Hey.
It's terrible at Easter time if you're Jewish, because people do that number. They actually point the finger and then say, Rach, the Jews killed Christ. At me. Like I did it. Like I was there. I always say, no, my parents were there, but they voted no. My parents did the catering. I make a lot of food references. A lot of food references because I grew up in a delicatessen. I grew up with food. Everything around was always to do with food. So I use lots of food metaphors and, you know, refer to myself as a food slut and all sorts of things. I eat around.
Thank you very much. I start pretty much every day angry and stay angry most of the day until I collapse in bed at night. And one way of dealing with that is to do comedy about it.
Next!
Madga Szbanski, aged 8, and I'm going to play Camptown Racetrack on my teeth.
Next!
It's not that long ago that an Australian comedian, when asked if he thought women were funny, went, well, not really.
Pull aboard, please. Make your way under the bus now, please. Pull aboard. 1, 2, 3, turn. There's Alice. You might have to lean this way a bit, Alison. And that's what we're going to do now, ladies and gentlemen. Number 7, coming up the stream to score. Here I come. He's going up the street. He's going to get the time. Look out, madam. I'm spawning. He gets tired again. I'm nearly there. Look out. Hey, mate.
There are 2 questions, if you're a comedian, you get asked most, and the first is, do you want to hear a joke? And you learn after a while to say no to that. And the other question is, what is Australian humour, or is there a distinctive style of Australian humour? Now, I've spent many hundreds of hours trying to answer that question and getting myself tied in knots, and I've developed a very short answer to that, which is Australian humour is what makes Australians laugh.
Hello. Come on, now, send me a right. Somebody push me. Nobody pushed. Somebody deliberately sneaked up.
I thought that the audience seemed very, very wide awake. And it's just as well I put words into their mouths, I think.
I'm a child of the baby boom. I've grown up through that whole generation. Primary school, the 50s, high school of the 60s, university in the late 60s. What you had here was a whole generation that really wasn't being catered to in terms of comedy. I remember growing up with Monty Python and laughing, and it was all overseas product. The stand-up comedy scene didn't exist in Australia very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, now I've got to do it.
There's always been stand-up comics, but they were a club circuit, mainly in Sydney. They were those comedians in the loud jackets and bow ties who came out and did mother-in-law jokes or basically misogynistic sex jokes. Melbourne didn't have those big licensed clubs with floor shows. Melbourne was a town of little theatres and and trendy little restaurants around the inner suburbs. So if any kind of comedy was going to be developed, it had to be developed in those venues.
Now, this is the proper part of Brunswick Street. This, in the late 70s, was second-hand shops. It was tacky little Italian bonbonieri milk bars. It was the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence. There was none of this flash. They didn't have banks here then because there was no money. Look at the bloody banks here now. A pie and a Lamington, that's all you could get down here. And look at the place now. It's full of galleries and arty-farty people. We might stop at the Flying Trapeze Cafe. Now, that was the first theatre restaurant that opened in Melbourne. It's just up here on the right. See that over there, Cafe Grigor, not even Cafe Greg or something Australian, Cafe Wayne. That was the Flying Trapeze.
Hey. The Flying Trapeze is very odd because we really had no idea what we were doing. It was the first or the second restaurant in Brunswick Street, which is now like 3 continuous miles of fashionable cafes. So we opened the door and the oddest collection of people turned up.
Jolly Jones is lovely, hour is near and so hard. Song jokes for young people like you are pretty passé, so I'd like to tell this little joke about a man who goes into a pub with a schnapper on a lead.
There were 7 of us working as a group called the Razzle Dazzle Review. We did weekly shows and we'd sit around for a month writing an hour and a half of comedy. And we had good skills there. We had people who could sing, play the piano, play the violin, play the drums. Nobody could juggle, and that was a blessing.
I want you to all spiritually now take out the very thing that you most love, your bank card.
Now, no one knew what a theatre restaurant was, really.
Like so.
This was something entirely new.
You're not doing it.
And in this tiny place, John Pinder served I guess you'd call it a meal, and you had entertainment. And that summer of 1974-75, which was a very hot summer, when you walked down Brunswick Street, you would see these people literally out on the pavement. They'd be out on tables and chairs right to the gutter, watching the show through the window.
There was a curiosity in the public to see a place like the Flying Trapeze. It was very bohemian. You could go there some nights and there'd be a Rolls Royce parked out the front of this. It was the only place in Brunswick Street that wasn't dedicated to community services, Victoria's, looking after the poor and disadvantaged. It was a ramshackle street, and in the middle of it was this one little place that lit up at night.
Some of the nights were the most excruciating nights you can imagine to watch. There were appalling singing acts. There were very confrontational acts where people abused the audience. There were people who did impressions which just didn't sound anything like the people they were doing impressions of. There were people who did nothing.
First of all, a big, big kiss to little Hector Crawford, who may have a surprise for Princess Lovely. And if he does, Princess Lovely may have a surprise for him. And guess what?
I think, we're pretty dreadful performers in those days, and it's a very humbling experience to look back at the tapes. Now, I think we got $10 a week, plus the hat. The hat was passed around every night.
There was no pay system at the beginning. It was busking with a fence around it. And I used to put $10 in the hat, started in the hope that some other idiot would put $10 in, and it was a brutal system because if you didn't cut it, you got 4 bottle tops, possibly some vomit, and my $10. But if you were terrific, money was hurled into the hat.
Not! 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 Not!
And when it started to get that good, I used to take my $10 back. The Flying Trapeze very quickly took off with the GP, and I think that was the beginning of, my God, there's money in this.